Sometimes the things we've lost find a way back to us when we least expect it. For 63-year-old cowboy Levi Boone, that moment came with a winning hand and keys to a forgotten casino. When Levi wins the crumbling grand gambling hall in a poker match, he expects rotting wood and dust. Instead, he discovers boxes of love letters, photographs, and ledgers telling stories of generations past. Among them, traces of his own history, a woman he abandoned, and evidence of a daughter he never knew existed. With help from a stubborn schoolteacher and a loyal mule, Levi restores the casino into something the dying town needs. But can an old cowboy truly escape his past? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The night Levi Boone's life changed started like most Friday nights in Salvation Bend, with whiskey, cards, and men too stubborn to know when to fold. The back room of McCreary's saloon smelled of tobacco and spilled beer, the kind of honest working man scent that Levi had known his entire life. At 63, he'd spent more nights in places like this than he cared to count, though lately he'd been thinking maybe it was time to count fewer of them going forward. He sat at the poker table with 4 other men, none of them spring chickens. To his left was Dutch Holloway, a cattle rancher who'd seen better decades. Across from him sat Raymond Pike, the town's former sheriff who'd retired after his knees gave out. Next to Raymond was Martin Cross, who owned the feed store and complained about everything from the weather to the government to the price of hay. And at the head of the table sat Coleman Watts, a land speculator from back east who'd been buying up properties in Salvation Bend for the past 2 years, waiting for some railroad expansion that might never come. "Your bet, Boone," Coleman said, his voice carrying that particular eastern smoothness that always made Levi think of politicians and snake oil salesmen. The man wore a vest that probably cost more than Levi's truck, and his hands were soft as a baby's bottom. Levi didn't trust men with soft hands. Levi studied his cards. A pair of 10s, nothing special. He'd been playing conservative all night, folding more than betting, nursing the same $100 he'd walked in with 3 hours ago. At his age, $100 wasn't something to throw around carelessly. It represented a week's worth of odd jobs, fixing fences for the Hendersons, mucking stalls at the Porter Ranch, helping old Mrs. Chen move furniture in her boarding house. "I'll see you're 20, Levi said, tossing chips into the center of the table. The game had started friendly enough, the way these things always did. Small stakes, smaller talk. Dutch had complained about his hip. Raymond had told the same story about the Hutchins robbery of '03 that everyone had heard, a dozen times. Martin had griped about the new tax assessments, and Coleman had smiled his city slicker smile and dealt the cards with practiced efficiency. But somewhere around the 3rd hour, after Dutch and Martin had folded out and gone home to their wives, the game had shifted, the stakes had grown. Coleman had started talking about property, about opportunity, about the grand gambling hall that sat at the end of Main Street like a rotting tooth in an otherwise decent smile. "That old casino's been empty for what, 15 years now?" Coleman said as he dealt a fresh hand. "Place is an eyesore. Been trying to buy it from the county, but there's some legal tangle with the previous owner's estate. Man died without a proper will, and his relatives are scattered to the 4 winds. My daddy used to play cards there," Raymond said, squinting at his hand. "Back in the 30s and 40s, that place was the heart of this town. Had a restaurant on the 1st floor, gambling hall on the 2nd, and rooms for rent on the 3rd. Place was always full of folks, ranchers, miners, travelers passing through on their way to California." Levi remembered the grand gambling hall from his youth, though just barely. He'd been maybe 7 or 8 the last time he'd seen it operating, back before his own daddy had dragged the family south to Texas for work that never quite panned out. The building had seemed enormous to his child's eyes. 3 stories of whitewashed wood and tall windows, with a balcony that wrapped around the 2nd floor. There'd been music coming from inside, and laughter, and the warm glow of oil lamps, making the windows look like they were filled with honey. "I'll raise 50, Coleman said, pushing chips forward. His smile had gotten wider. "In fact, I'll make this interesting. I've got the deed to that old casino in my pocket. County finally agreed to sell it to me last week. I'll put that deed in the pot. You match it with everything you've got on. The table, Boone, and we'll see who walks away with something memorable." Raymond whistled low. "That's a hell of a bet, Coleman. That building's got to be worth something, even half fallen down." "It's worth exactly what someone's willing to pay for it," Coleman said. "And right now, I'm willing to bet it that I've got a better hand than our friend Levi here." Levi looked at the man across the table. Something in Coleman's eyes didn't sit right, too confident, too eager. The man wanted Levi to fold, wanted him to walk away from the hand, which meant Coleman was bluffing, or close to it. Levi had been playing cards since he was 12 years old, and he'd learned to read men the way some folks read books. He looked down at his own chips, $240, give or take. Money he'd saved for winter expenses, for the lean months when odd jobs dried up like creek beds in August. It was foolish to risk it. He was a 63-year-old man with no pension, no savings to speak of, and a rented room above a hardware store that smelled like turpentine and sawdust. But something in Coleman's smile made his decision for him. "I'm all in," Levi said, pushing his chips to the center of the table. Coleman's smile faltered for just a second, so quick most men would have missed it, but Levi caught it, and he knew he'd been right. The man was bluffing. "Well then," Coleman said, recovering his composure, "let's see what you've got." Levi laid down his cards, pair of tens, like he'd thought. Not much, but honest. Coleman's face went red. He laid down his own hand, pair of nines. Raymond laughed so hard he nearly fell off his chair. "I'll be damned. Boone, you just won yourself a casino with a pair of tens." Coleman reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. He slapped it on the table with more force than necessary. "There's your deed. Hope you enjoy that rotting pile of timber. You'll spend more fixing it up than it's worth." Levi picked up the deed carefully, as if it might crumble in his hands. The paper was thick, official-looking, with the county seal embossed at the top. "Property deed for the Grand Gambling Hall, located at 247 Main Street, Salvation Bend, New Mexico Territory. 3 stories, 6,000 square feet, built 1,887. "I don't understand why you bet it if you didn't want to lose it," Levi said quietly. Coleman stood up, shoving his chair back. "I didn't think you'd be stupid enough to call. That building's a money pit, Boone. Have fun drowning in it." He grabbed his hat and walked out, letting the door slam behind him. Raymond clapped Levi on the shoulder. "Don't listen to him. That man's sore because he got beat by a better player. The Grand Gambling Hall's got history. She's got bones. Maybe she's got a future too, with the right person looking after her. I don't know the first thing about running a casino," Levi said, "or restoring a building. I can fix a fence and shoe a horse. But this, then you learn," Raymond said simply. "Same way you learned everything else in your life. One day at a time, one board at a time. Besides, what else were you planning to do with your golden years? Sit in a rocking chair and wait to die?" The question hit harder than Raymond probably intended. Because yes, that was exactly what Levi had been planning, if he was honest with himself. Work until he couldn't work anymore, then fade away quietly like so many old cowboys before him. No family to speak of, no legacy, just another forgotten man in a dying town. "I suppose I should go look at it," Levi said, folding the deed and putting it in his shirt pocket right over his heart. "I suppose you should," Raymond agreed. "Come on, I'll walk with you. These old knees don't like the cold, but they can manage a few blocks." They left McCreary's together, stepping out into the October night. Salvation Bend looked like a town that had been left behind by time and progress. Main Street stretched for 6 blocks, lined with buildings that remembered better days. The hardware store, the post office, Mrs. Chen's boarding house, the feed store. The church with its white steeple pointing toward heaven like an accusation, and at the far end, separated from the other buildings by an empty lot thick with sage and tumbleweeds, stood the grand gambling hall. Even in the moonlight, Levi could see how far the building had fallen. The whitewash had peeled away in long strips, exposing grey wood underneath. Several windows on the third floor were broken, their empty frames looking like missing teeth. The balcony sagged in the middle, and part of the railing had collapsed. A wooden sign that once hung above the entrance now lay in pieces on the front steps. "She's seen better days," Raymond said softly. "She has," Levi agreed. They stood there in silence for a long moment, two old men looking at an old building under old stars that had seen countless other men, and buildings come and go. "My daddy told me something once," Raymond said. "He said a building's like a person worth saving, as long as there's still something good at the core." The grand gambling hall. She was built by men who believed in community, in gathering places, in the idea that people need somewhere to come together. That's a good foundation. Everything else is just surface damage. Levi thought about that. Surface damage. He had plenty of that himself, arthritis in his hands, a bad knee that ached when it rained, scars from rodeos and ranch work, and plain old foolishness. But underneath he supposed there was still something that wanted to be useful, wanted to matter. "I'll come back in the daylight," Levi said. "See what I've really won." "Good idea," Raymond said. "And Boone? Don't let Coleman's words get under your skin. That man's been buying up property, hoping to flip it for profit. He's sore because he miscalculated. You didn't beat him at cards, you beat him at life. He'll get over it or he won't, but either way, that's his problem, not yours." They parted ways at the corner, Raymond heading home to the small house he shared with his daughter and son-in-law, Levi walking back to his rented room above the hardware store. He climbed the narrow stairs, his knee protesting each step, and let himself into the single room that held everything he owned: a narrow bed, a dresser with a broken drawer, a hot plate and a tiny refrigerator, 2 changes of clothes, and a photograph of his parents that he kept face down because looking at it hurt too much. He took the deed from his pocket and set it on the dresser, smoothing out the creases. In the dim light from the bare bulb overhead, the official seal gleamed dully. The grand gambling hall. His now, for better or worse, Levi lay down on the bed without undressing, hands folded behind his head, staring at the water-stained ceiling. He thought about Coleman's anger, Raymond's encouragement, and the broken building waiting for him at the end of Main Street. He thought about being 63 years old with nothing to show for all those years except calluses and memories he tried not to examine too closely. And he thought about his father's voice from long ago, when Levi was just a boy standing in front of that same building, asking what gambling was. "It's taking a chance on something," his father had said, "hoping you'll win more than you lose." Levi closed his eyes. He'd just gambled everything he had on a collapsing building in a dying town. Maybe it was time to see if he could finally win something worth keeping. Morning came cold and clear. Levi woke with the sun, as he'd done for most of his 63 years, and lay still for a moment, trying to remember why his chest felt tight with something that might have been anticipation or might have been dread. Then he remembered the deed, and the building, and the foolish bet that had changed everything. He dressed in his usual clothes, jeans worn soft from years of wear, a flannel shirt that had seen better days, his work boots with the left sole coming loose. He made instant coffee on the hot plate and drank it standing by the window, looking out at Main Street as the town slowly woke up. Mrs. Chen opening her boarding house door to sweep the front steps. Martin Cross unlocking the feed store. The morning bus rumbling through on its way to Santa Fe, half empty as always. And at the end of the street, the grand gambling hall. Waiting, Levi finished his coffee, pulled on his jacket, and headed downstairs. He'd borrowed a crowbar from the hardware store owner, promising to return it by noon, and now he carried it under one arm as he walked toward his new property. His property? The words still didn't feel real. The front door was chained shut with a padlock thick with rust. Levi studied it for a moment, then worked the crowbar into the hasp. The wood around the screws had rotted soft, and with one good pull, the entire locking mechanism came away from the doorframe. The chain clattered to the ground, and the door swung inward on hinges that screamed like dying animals. The smell hit him, first dust and dry rot and time itself, trapped and concentrated. Levi stepped inside, and the floorboards creaked under his weight but held. Daylight filtered through the dirty windows, painting everything in shades of grey and amber. He stood in what must have been the main restaurant area. Tables and chairs sat exactly where they'd been abandoned, some overturned, others still set as if waiting for customers who would never come. The bar ran along the left wall, bottles still lined up behind it, their contents long evaporated. A painting hung crooked above the bar, a western landscape with mountains and a sunset rendered in oils that had darkened with age. Levi moved deeper into the room. His boots left prints in the dust. A staircase at the back led up to the second floor, and he tested the first step carefully before trusting it with his full weight. The stairs groaned but held, and he climbed slowly, one hand on the railing, ready to grab hold if anything gave way beneath him. The second floor opened into a large gambling hall, just as Raymond had described. Card tables scattered throughout the space, a roulette wheel in the corner, its once bright colors faded to ghosts of red and black. Along the far wall stood a piano, its lid closed, several keys missing like gaps in a smile. Windows lined both sides of the room, and though many were cracked or broken, enough remained intact to let in the morning light. Levi walked to one and looked out at Main Street below. From up here he could see the whole town spread out, small, tired, but still standing, still trying. He turned back to the room and noticed something he'd missed before. A door on the side wall, partially hidden behind a fallen curtain. He crossed to it and pulled the curtain aside, sending up a cloud of dust that made him cough. The door was unlocked, and it opened into what must have been an office. The room was smaller than he expected, barely 10 feet square. A desk sat against one wall, its surface covered with papers yellowed with age. Filing cabinets stood in the corner, and on the desk, barely visible under a layer of dust, sat a wooden box with tarnished brass corners. Levi picked up the box carefully. It was heavier than it looked, solidly made from dark wood that might have been walnut or cherry. He wiped the dust away with his sleeve and saw that someone had carved initials into the lid, C.M.B. His breath caught in his throat. Catherine Marie Brennan. The name came back to him like a blow. Catherine, Katie, the girl he'd known when he was 21 and stupid and certain the world would bend itself to his will, the girl with red hair and green eyes and a laugh that made him believe anything was possible. The girl he'd loved with the intensity only young men can manage, before they learn that love isn't enough if you're too selfish to stay in one place. He'd left Salvation Bend in the spring of 1983, chasing rodeo dreams and running from the responsibility that came with settling down. Katie had asked him to stay. She'd said there was something important they needed to talk about, something that couldn't wait. But he'd been 21 and immortal, and the road had been calling, and he'd kissed her goodbye and promised to write, and driven away in a pickup truck that barely ran. He never came back, never wrote, never called. He'd heard through the grapevine a few years later that she'd married someone else, a teacher or a lawyer, someone respectable, someone who stayed. Levi's hands shook as he lifted the lid of the box. Inside, wrapped in a piece of faded red ribbon, lay a bundle of letters. He recognized his own handwriting on the top envelope, addressed to Miss Catherine Brennan, General Delivery, Salvation Bend, New Mexico. The letter he'd promised to write. The one he'd actually written and then never sent, because by the time he'd finished it, 2 months had passed, and he'd already moved on to another town, another rodeo, another way of not thinking about what he'd left behind. But beneath his unsent letter were others. Dozens of them. Letters in Katie's handwriting, each one addressed to Levi Boone, care of various rodeo circuits and towns across the West. Letters he'd never received because he'd never stayed in one place long enough for mail to find him. He opened the first one with trembling fingers. The paper was brittle. The ink faded but still legible. "Dear Levi," it began, "I hope this letter finds you, though I'm not sure it will. I waited as long as I could to tell you in person, but I can't wait any longer. I'm pregnant. The baby's due in December. I know you have dreams, and I don't want to trap you, but I thought you should know. You're going to be a father. If you want to be part of this, come home. If you don't, I'll understand. I'll manage somehow. But please, at least write back. Let me know you got this letter. Let me know something. With love, always, Katie." The date at the top read the 15th of May 1983, 2 months after he'd left. Levi sat down hard on the dusty floor, the letter still in his hands. A daughter. He had a daughter, or had a daughter. She'd be 42 years old now, a grown woman with a life he knew nothing about. He opened another letter, then another. Katie's words, painting a picture of a life he'd missed entirely. Her pregnancy, her parents' disappointment, her decision to keep the baby and raise it alone when he never responded. The birth of a daughter named Emma, the struggles of single motherhood, her marriage 3 years later to Thomas Wright, the high school English teacher, a good man who helped raise Emma as his own. The letters continued through the years, growing further apart as time passed. Updates on Emma's childhood, her first day of school, her love of reading, her talent for music. Katie stopped asking Levi to come back, stopped wondering if he'd received the letters. But she kept writing them anyway, as if by recording the details of their daughter's life, she was keeping some small door open for him. The last letter was dated December 2011. "Dear Levi," it said, "I'm writing this one last time, though I know you'll never read it, just like you never read any of the others. Emma's 28 now. She's a teacher, like Thomas. She got married last spring to a good man who loves her. She's happy, Levi. She turned out just fine without you. I think I always knew you weren't coming back. I think I knew it the morning you left. But I had to try. I had to believe that somewhere, somehow, you'd care enough to want to know about her. I was young and foolish, just like you. We've both grown older since then. Thomas passed away last year, cancer. Emma took it hard. She loved him like a father, which he was in the way that mattered. I'm closing the grand gambling hall next month. Business has been slow for years, and I'm tired of fighting to keep it open. Tired of fighting in general. This building holds too many memories of my grandfather who built it, of my parents who ran it, of the girl I was when I met you. It's time to let it go. I'll store these letters in the office safe before I leave. Maybe someday someone will find them and wonder about the story they tell. Maybe you'll even find them yourself, though I suppose that's unlikely. You were always better at leaving than arriving. Take care of yourself, wherever you are. I hope you found what you were looking for out there on the road. Katie. Levi read the letter 3 times, his eyes blurring with tears he hadn't shed in decades. Katie had owned this building, her family's building, the place he'd just won in a poker game, 40 years too late to matter, and she'd left these letters here, hidden away, a record of the life he'd missed, and the daughter he'd never known. He pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to stop the tears, but they came anyway. Great, racking sobs that shook his whole body. He cried for Katie, who'd deserved better than a 21-year-old fool. He cried for Emma, who'd grown up without a father because he'd been too selfish to stay. He cried for all the years he couldn't get back, all the moments he'd missed, all the love he'd thrown away because he'd thought freedom was more important than connection. When he finally stopped crying, the sun had moved across the sky, and the light in the office had changed from morning gold to afternoon white. Levi's knees ached from sitting on the hard floor, and his eyes felt raw and swollen. He gathered the letters carefully, retying them with the faded red ribbon. He put them back in the wooden box and held it against his chest. This box held the truth of his life, not the rodeos he'd won or the places he'd seen, but the people he'd failed and the chances he'd wasted. The grand gambling hall suddenly felt less like a lucky win and more like a judgment. He'd won Katie's building, the place that had mattered to her, 4 decades after he'd walked away from her life. There was a symmetry to it that felt almost cruel. But there was also, perhaps, a chance to make something right. Even if it was 40 years too late, he couldn't undo the past, couldn't change the man he'd been. But maybe he could honor what Katie had tried to tell him. Maybe he could restore this building she'd loved, this place her family had built. Maybe he could find his daughter and finally tell her he was sorry. Levi stood slowly, his joints protesting. He tucked the wooden box under his arm and walked back through the gambling hall, down the creaking stairs, through the dusty restaurant, and out into the clear October afternoon. He had work to do. Levi spent the next 3 days living inside the grand gambling hall. Not literally, the building had no to spit it. Running water and the electricity had been shut off years ago, but he arrived each morning at dawn and didn't leave until darkness forced him out. He brought sandwiches from the diner and ate them standing up, too distracted to sit. He brought a notepad and pencil and walked through every room, writing down what needed fixing, what could be salvaged, what had to be torn out and replaced. The list grew longer each day. On the 4th morning, he was on the 3rd floor examining the guest rooms when he heard footsteps on the stairs. He turned, half expecting Coleman Watts come to gloat about the money pit Levi had won. Instead, he found a woman standing in the doorway of the room he was inspecting. She looked to be in her mid-50s, with steel-grey hair pulled back in a practical bun and sharp blue eyes that took in everything at once. She wore jeans and a canvas jacket, and she carried a leather satchel over one shoulder. There was something familiar about her face, though Levi couldn't quite place it. "You're Levi Boone," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am. I'm Helen Wright. I teach at the elementary school." She paused, then added, "I was Katie Brennan's friend. I heard you won her building." The name Wright registered like a bell. "Thomas Wright's daughter," Helen finished. "Thomas was my father. Katie was like a second mother to me growing up. This building," she gestured around the dusty room, "I spent half my childhood here. Katie used to let me help in the kitchen when school let out. She taught me how to make pie crust and how to deal cards." A small smile crossed her face at the memory. "I was probably the only 10-year-old in New Mexico who could shuffle like a Vegas dealer." Levi felt his throat tighten. This woman had known Katie, had loved her, had probably heard stories about the man who'd gotten her pregnant and disappeared. He wondered what Katie had told her, what words she'd used to describe him. "I found letters," he said quietly, "in the office. Katie's letters to me. I didn't know about any of it. About Emma. About any of it." Helen's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "Emma's my sister, half-sister technically. Dad married Katie when I was 3, and Emma was 1. I never thought of her as anything but my full sister." "Is she—" Levi started, then had to clear his throat. "Is she here? In town?" "She lives in Albuquerque. She's a high school English teacher, married, has 2 kids. Good life." Helen said it firmly, as if establishing a fact that couldn't be disputed. "She doesn't know about you." Katie never told her who her biological father was, said he was someone she'd known briefly, someone who'd moved on. Emma never pushed for details. She had Dad, and that was enough. The words landed like stones. Emma had a good life, a father who'd loved her, and no need for Levi's late arrival into her story. He should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt hollowed out. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Levi said. "I didn't know about this building's connection to Katie when I won it. It was just luck, bad timing." "I don't know." "Luck," Helen repeated, skeptical. "You win Katie's building in a card game 40 years after you left her. That's not luck, Mr. Boone. That's the universe having a sense of humor." She walked further into the room, running her hand along the windowsill, then examining her palm, dusty but not as bad as it could have been. "What are you planning to do with it? Flip it? Sell it to Coleman Watts for whatever he was willing to pay?" "No," Levi said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "I'm going to fix it, restore it. I don't know to what exactly, but I'm going to make it right." Helen studied him for a long moment. Katie loved this building. Her grandfather built it in 1887. It survived fires, floods, the Depression, 2 world wars. Her family put their whole lives into it. When she had to close it down, Helen's voice caught slightly. It broke something in her, felt like admitting defeat. I know I can't undo what I did, Levi said. Can't change being the kind of man who left when he should have stayed. But maybe I can do this one thing. Maybe I can bring this place back to life. With what money? Helen asked bluntly. Restoration like this costs more than you're probably thinking. New roof, new wiring, new plumbing, structural repairs. You're looking at $50,000 minimum, probably closer to 100. You have that kind of money? No, Levi admitted, but I have time, and I can learn. I've been fixing things my whole life, fences, barns, equipment. Buildings can't be that different. They're very different, Helen said, but there was something less harsh in her voice now. But I suppose stubbornness counts for something. She opened her satchel and pulled out a leather-bound book. I brought you this. Katie gave it to me for safekeeping the day she closed the hall. It's the ledger her grandfather started when he built this place. Every expense, every repair, every improvement, it's all in here. Names of contractors, suppliers, techniques they used. If you're serious about restoring this building properly, you'll need to understand how it was built in the first place. Levi took the ledger carefully. It was heavy, the leather worn soft with handling. He opened it to the first page and saw spidery handwriting in faded ink. June 1887. Began construction on the Grand Gambling Hall. May this establishment bring prosperity and community to Salvation Bend for generations to come. Charles Marcus Brennan. Katie's grandfather, Helen said. He was an idealist. Believed buildings could bring people together, give them a place to belong. Katie believed that too. Levi flipped through the pages, seeing decades of records, notes, sketches. Multiple someones had poured their hearts into this building. It wasn't just wood and nails. It was legacy. Why are you helping me? Levi asked. Helen was quiet for a moment. I'm not sure I am helping you. Maybe I'm helping Katie. She spent 40 years maintaining this place, even when it stopped making financial sense. She couldn't let it die, but she also couldn't keep it alive. If you're actually going to restore it, if you're going to honor what her family built, then maybe her sacrifice wasn't for nothing. She moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, there's a mule in the pasture behind the building, gray thing, stubborn as hell. Showed up about a week after Katie closed the hall and never left. She used to feed it, talk to it. Named it Jerome, after her grandfather's middle name. Jerome comes with the building, whether you like it or not. A mule, Levi said. Told you he was stubborn, Helen said. Seems appropriate. After Helen left, Levi stood in the empty room, holding the ledger. Through the broken window, he could see the pasture she'd mentioned overgrown with sage and buffalo grass, and there, standing in the shade of a cottonwood tree, was a grey mule watching the building with what looked like deliberate patience. Levi laughed, the sound surprising him. Here he was, 63 years old, broke, with no skills in construction, trying to restore a massive building as some kind of penance for sins committed 4 decades ago. And now he had a mule to feed. It was absurd. It was probably impossible. But it was also, for the first time in years, a reason to get up in the morning that felt like it mattered. He climbed down the stairs, out the back door, and walked across the pasture to the cottonwood tree. The mule watched him approach with dark, intelligent eyes. Jerome, Levi said. That's a dignified name for a mule. Jerome flicked his ears but didn't move. I don't know what I'm doing, Levi told him. I'm probably going to fail. This whole thing is probably a fool's errand, but I'm going to try anyway. You interested in sticking around for the show? The mule took 2 steps forward and nudged Levi's shoulder with his nose, gentle but firm. Levi reached up and scratched behind Jerome's ears, the mule's eyes half closed in contentment. All right then, Levi said. Partners. He stood there in the October sunshine, hand on a mule's neck, looking back at the broken building that had become his responsibility and his chance at redemption. Somewhere inside that building were Katie's letters, her grandfather's ledger, and the accumulated history of generations who'd believed in something worth building. Levi took a breath and let it out slowly. Time to get to work. The work began small because it had to. Levi had exactly $87 to his name after buying basic supplies: a hammer, nails, a box of screws, wood putty, and paint remover. Not enough to hire help or rent equipment. Barely enough to make a dent in what needed doing, but it was a start. He focused. On the first floor, figuring if he could make the main restaurant presentable, he could at least show the town he was serious. He started by clearing debris, years of accumulated dirt, fallen plaster, broken furniture, the remains of what mice and birds had left behind. He filled garbage bags and hauled them to the dumpster behind the feed store that Martin Cross said he could use, as long as Levi didn't tell the county. Jerome followed him back and forth like a shadow. The mule seemed to have appointed himself as supervisor of the project, standing nearby while Levi worked, occasionally nudging him when Levi stopped moving for too long. Levi found himself talking to the animal more than he'd talked to another living creature in years. "See this water damage?" Levi said, pointing to a section of wall where the plaster had bubbled and fallen away. "That's from the roof leaking, probably been leaking for years. I can patch this wall, but if I don't fix the roof first, I'm just wasting my time," Jerome snorted, which Levi chose to interpret as agreement. The roof was beyond him, 3 stories up, steep pitch, missing shingles, possible structural damage. That would take money he didn't have and skills he'd never learned. He made a note in the margins of the ledger Helen had given him. "Roof find roofer willing to work for promises." On his 6th day, while cleaning out the office on the 2nd floor, Levi found another box hidden behind the filing cabinets. This one was tin instead of wood, the kind that might have once held cookies or tea. When he opened it, he found photographs. The first was a wedding photo, Katie, in a simple white dress, standing next to a tall man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Thomas Wright, Levi assumed. Katie looked happy, though there was something careful in her expression, as if happiness was something she'd learned to approach cautiously. Behind them stood a little girl, maybe 3 years old, holding Katie's hand. Helen, probably. The next photos showed Katie and Thomas with 2 girls, Helen and another child who must have been Emma. Emma, at 4, gap-toothed and grinning. Emma, at 7, holding a book almost as big as she was. Emma, at 12, gangly and serious, standing in front of the school. Emma, at 16, in a graduation gown, flanked by Katie and Thomas, all 3 of them beaming. Levi studied each photo, trying to memorize his daughter's face at every age, trying to see if she looked like him at all. She had Katie's red hair and delicate features, but maybe something in the shape of her jaw was his. Or maybe he was just searching for connection where none existed, trying to claim a piece of a child he'd abandoned before she was born. One photograph stopped him cold. It showed Katie and Emma in the restaurant downstairs, standing behind the bar. Emma looked to be about 8, standing on a stool so she could reach the counter, wearing an apron that was much too big for her. They were both laughing at something outside the frame, and behind them, clearly visible through the window, was the grand gambling hall sign, whole and proud and freshly painted. Levi's hands shook as he held the photograph. His daughter had stood in this building, had worked here, played here, grown up here. The floors he was sweeping, the walls he was repairing, these were the same spaces that had sheltered her childhood. He found a silver frame in the debris, tarnished but intact, and carefully placed the photograph of Katie and Emma inside it. He set it on the office desk, where Katie must have kept her records, where she'd written those letters he'd never received. It felt right to put Emma's image there, making her present in the space that held so much of her history. That afternoon, Raymond stopped by with sandwiches from the diner and 2 bottles of cold beer. They sat on the front steps, eating in companionable silence, while Jerome stood nearby, hoping for handouts. "Towns. Talking," Raymond said eventually. "Folks are curious what you're doing with this place. Some think you're crazy. Others think maybe you're brave." "I think I'm probably both," Levi said. "Helen Wright's been talking you up," Raymond continued. "Told people you're serious about restoration, about doing it right. That carries weight coming from her. She's respected. She gave me the building's ledger," Levi said. "Her mother's grandfather's records. I didn't deserve that kindness." "Maybe not," Raymond agreed. "But she gave it anyway. That's how things work in a small town. People help each other, even when they probably shouldn't. Especially when they probably shouldn't." They watched Main Street for a while, the few cars that passed, Mrs. Chen watering her flower boxes, a dog trotting down the sidewalk with purpose. "You know what this town needs?" Raymond said. "It needs a heart. Used to be this building right here. The grand gambling hall was where people gathered, celebrated, mourned, made deals, found comfort. When Katie closed it, something in Salvation Bend just died. Folks started going to Santa Fe for everything, stopped having reasons to stick around." "That's a lot of weight to put on one building," Levi said. "Buildings are just structures," Raymond said. "But what happens inside them, that's community. That's what makes a place worth living in instead of just passing through." After Raymond left, Levi went back inside and stood in the empty restaurant, trying to imagine it full of people. Tables occupied, conversations flowing, the smell of cooking food, the clink of glasses. It seemed impossible. The building was so broken, and he was just one old man with no money and fading strength. But then he thought about Katie, keeping this place running for years after it stopped making financial sense because she believed in what it represented. He thought about her grandfather, starting with nothing but raw lumber and a vision. He thought about his daughter, laughing in this very room, unaware that the man who should have been her father was out there somewhere, too selfish to care. He couldn't fix the past, but maybe he could fix the present. One board, one wall, one room at a time. Levi picked up his hammer and went to work on replacing a section of rotted baseboard. Jerome wandered in and settled on the floor nearby, watching with patient eyes. Outside, the sun moved across the October sky, painting long shadows through the dusty windows. Hours passed. Levi's hands cramped and his back ached, but he kept working. When he finally stopped, near midnight, he'd replaced 15 feet of baseboard and patched 3 major holes in the walls. It wasn't much. It would take months, maybe years, to restore everything, but it was progress. He locked up and walked back to his rented room, exhausted. Jerome followed him as far as the empty lot, then turned back toward the pasture behind the building, his own form of good night. Levi climbed the stairs to his room and lay down fully clothed, too tired to undress. Before he fell asleep, he thought about the photograph of Katie and Emma, now sitting on the office desk in a silver frame. Tomorrow he'd bring flowers from Mrs. Chen's garden to put beside it. Small gesture, inadequate, but something. He was 63 years old, trying to rebuild a building and perhaps a piece of himself. The odds were against him. The work was overwhelming. But for the first time in decades, he had a reason to believe that tomorrow might matter more than yesterday. That would have to be enough. November arrived with cold mornings and the kind of wind that found every crack in the grand gambling hall's walls. Levi had been working on the building for 3 weeks, and while progress was visible, it was also becoming clear just how massive the task truly was. Every repair revealed 2 more problems. Every fixed board exposed rotted joists. Every patched wall showed structural issues that couldn't be ignored. He was running out of money again. The $87 had dwindled to $12, and he'd need that for food. He'd started taking odd jobs in the afternoons, mucking stalls for the Porter Ranch, splitting firewood for Mrs. Chen, anything that paid cash and didn't take him away from the building for too long. Helen had become a regular presence. She stopped by most evenings after school, sometimes bringing supplies she claimed were extras from various places, though Levi suspected she was buying them with her own money. Sandpaper, wood glue, a box of light bulbs, for when he got the electricity working. She never said much, just set the items down and pitched in, sweeping, cleaning, sorting through the salvageable furniture. "Found something today?" Helen said one evening, emerging from one of the third-floor rooms carrying a small wooden box. It was in Emma's old room. Katie let her stay here sometimes during summer breaks. Help with the customers. She set the box on a table they'd been using for sorting. It was cedar, about the size of a shoebox, with a delicate inlay of lighter wood, forming a floral pattern on the lid. When Helen opened it, a tinkling melody began to play, something soft and old-fashioned that Levi didn't recognize. "Music box," Helen said. Katie gave it to Emma for her 10th birthday. Emma loved it, kept her treasures in it. Hair ribbons, special rocks, that kind of thing. Inside the box, nestled in faded tissue paper, were the artifacts of a little girl's life. A ribbon, once bright red, now faded to dusty pink, a handful of marbles, cat's eyes in blue and green, a small turquoise stone, smooth and perfect, and beneath these, a folded piece of paper that looked like it had been handled many times. Helen unfolded it carefully. It was a child's drawing, done in crayon. 2 stick figures labeled Mama and Emma, standing in front of a building that was recognizably the Grand Gambling Hall. Above the building, a sun with rays extending in all directions. At the bottom, in careful child's handwriting, "My home." Levi felt something crack inside his chest. This building hadn't just been Katie's business, it had been Emma's home, the place where she'd felt safe, loved, part of something bigger than herself. And he'd known nothing about any of it, had been out there chasing belt buckles and 8-second rides, while his daughter drew pictures of a home he should have been part of. She was happy here, Helen said quietly. Katie made sure of that. Even when money was tight, even when she was exhausted from working double shifts, she made this place feel like magic for Emma. There were always fresh flowers on the tables, always music playing, always the smell of something good cooking. Katie gave Emma everything she could. Everything except a father, Levi said, his voice rough. She had a father, Helen corrected. My dad loved Emma like she was his own blood. He taught her to read, to think, to question. He went to every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every milestone. He was there. She paused, then added more gently, "You weren't. That's fact. But what you do with that fact, that's up to you." Before Levi could respond, they heard footsteps on the stairs. Coleman Watts appeared in the doorway, looking around the room with an expression that suggested he smelled something unpleasant. "Making progress, I see," Coleman said, though his tone implied the opposite, or at least making something. "Can I help you?" Levi asked, fighting to keep his voice level. "Just checking on my investment," Coleman said. "Or rather, my former investment. Wanted to see how you're managing with the money pit I generously gave you." "Nobody gave me anything," Levi said. "I won it fair and square." "Fair and square," Coleman repeated, smiling without warmth. "You know, I've been looking into the legal status of that poker game. Turns out there might be some questions about whether gambling debts are enforceable contracts in this state, especially when the parties involved were, how shall I put this, impaired? You were drunk. We were all drunk," Helen said sharply. "Don't pretend otherwise. And don't pretend you have legal standing to contest a bet you lost." Coleman's smile widened. "I'm not pretending anything, Miss Wright, just stating facts. The fact is, I've invested considerable time and money in this town's development. I've bought properties, improved them, prepared for growth. This building is a key piece of that puzzle. And watching it be, he gestured around the room, tinkered with by someone with no experience, no capital, and no realistic plan, well, it concerns me as a stakeholder in Salvation Ben's future." "What do you want?" Levi asked. "I want to make you an offer, a generous offer. I'll pay you $10,000 for the deed to this building. That's 10 times what you put into. That poker pot. You walk away with a profit. I take over the restoration properly. Everyone wins. $10,000. It was more money than Levi had seen in years. Enough to start over somewhere else, maybe rent a small place, live modestly for a year or two. It was practical. It was sensible. It was also surrendering the only meaningful thing he'd attempted in 4 decades. "No," Levi said. Coleman's expression hardened. "Don't be foolish. You're a broke cowboy in his 60s with no construction experience. You'll never finish this project. In 6 months, you'll be bankrupt and broken, and the county will seize this building for unpaid taxes. Then I'll buy it from them for a fraction of what I'm offering you now. This is your chance to leave with dignity." I said no. "Mr. Boone," the man said no. Helen interrupted. "You should leave now, Mr. Watts." Coleman looked between them, his face reddening. "Fine. Waste your time and money. But don't come crying to me when this whole thing collapses around you. And it will collapse. Buildings like this always do when they're left in the hands of amateurs." He turned and walked out, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. After he left, Levi sat down on the dusty floor, suddenly exhausted. "He's not wrong. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to fail. Maybe," Helen said, sitting beside him. "But you're going to fail, trying to do something good. That counts for something." She picked up the music box and wound it again. The melody played out in the empty room, sweet and sad and achingly hopeful. "Katie used to play this for Emma when she couldn't sleep," Helen said. "Said it was like catching time and holding it still for just a moment. That's what this building is, Levi. It's caught time, all the moments that happened here, all the people who passed through, all the love and loss and ordinary living. You're not just restoring wood and plaster. You're restoring time itself." Levi looked at her. "That's impossible. Most worthwhile things are," Helen said. She stood and offered him her hand. "Come on. We've got 2 more hours of daylight. Let's use them." He took her hand and let her pull him to his feet. Outside, Jerome brayed impatiently, reminding them that stubbornness and work were better responses to doubt than surrender. They went back to work. The first snow came on the 15th of November, light and brief, but enough to show Levi just how poorly the building was prepared for winter. Cold air poured through gaps in the walls, around window frames, through holes in the roof he couldn't yet fix. He brought space heaters from the hardware store, borrowing them on credit he wasn't sure he could repay, and set them up in the restaurant area, so at least one room would be warm enough to work in. Word had spread through town about Coleman's offer and Levi's refusal. Opinions were divided. Some folks thought Levi was a fool to turn down $10,000. Others, a growing number, seemed impressed by his determination to restore Katie's building properly, even if it meant struggling. On a grey Tuesday morning, Dutch Holloway showed up with his truck full of lumber. "Got this from a barn I'm tearing down on my property," Dutch said, unloading 2x4s onto the ground beside the building. "Wood's old but sound. Pine, mostly. Figure you could use it for something." "I can't pay you," Levi said. "Didn't ask you to," Dutch replied. "Katie gave my wife and me our wedding reception here, back in '82. Wouldn't take a penny for it, said it was her gift. Been owing her a gift back ever since." Over the next week, others came with offerings. Martin Cross brought paint he'd over-ordered for the feed store, 3 gallons of cream-colored interior paint that would brighten the restaurant walls. Mrs. Chen brought curtains she'd found in her attic, good lace that had belonged to her mother. Raymond arrived with his son-in-law, a young man who knew electrical work, and together they spent a Saturday tracing the building's wiring, marking what needed replacing. "You've got quite a bit of knob and tube still running through the walls," the son-in-law said, pointing to the old-style wiring. "That's fire waiting to happen. You'll need to rewire the whole building eventually. But I can at least make sure what's here won't burn the place down." Helen organized the volunteers, making lists, coordinating schedules, keeping track of what needed doing and who could do what. She seemed to have shifted from skeptical observer to active participant, though Levi wasn't quite sure when that transformation had happened. One evening, after everyone else had left, Levi and Helen worked together to clean out Katie's office. Most of the paperwork was old tax records and supplier invoices, things that could be thrown away. But in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, wrapped in cloth, Helen found a small velvet box. Inside was a wedding ring, simple gold band, worn thin in places from years of wearing. On the inside was an engraving, TW to CB, forever found. Mom's wedding ring, Helen said softly. I wondered where this had gone. She stopped wearing it after Dad died. Said it hurt too much to feel it on her finger and remember he was gone. She held the ring up to the lamplight, watching it gleam. They were happy, you know, my dad and Katie. It wasn't passionate, maybe, not like first love, but it was real. He knew about you. Katie told him everything before they got married. He said he didn't care about her past, only about her future, and he meant it. He never once made her feel like she'd made mistakes. He sounds like a good man, Levi said. He was the best man, Helen said. Emma and I both thought so. She was quiet for a moment, then added, I think that's what made it hardest for Katie. She'd found happiness with him, built a good life, but there was always this shadow, this question mark. She wrote you all those letters, but part of me thinks she wasn't really writing to you. She was writing to the idea of you, the boy she'd loved before life got complicated. She needed to believe you would have cared if you'd known. I would have, Levi said, and then stopped, because he honestly didn't know if that was true. The boy he'd been at 21, would he have come back if he'd gotten those letters? Or would he have found excuses, told himself Katie would be better off without him, continued running because running was easier than staying? I want to believe that, Helen said. But belief and truth aren't always the same thing. She set the ring back in its box and placed it on the desk next to the photograph of Katie and Emma. Small memorial to a life lived, to choices made and roads taken. Can I ask you something? Helen said. Why are you really doing this? And don't tell me it's about restoration or honoring Katie or any of that. What's the real reason? Levi thought about lying, about giving her the answer she probably wanted to hear, but she'd been honest with him, and he owed her the same. Because I'm 63 years old and I've never built anything that lasted, he said. I've worked 1,000 jobs, been to 1,000 places, and there's not a single thing in this world that's better because I was in it. No mark I've left that matters. This building, if I can fix it, if I can make it something good again, then maybe I'll have done one thing in my life that counts. Maybe I'll have proof that I existed for some reason other than taking up space. Helen looked at him for a long moment. That's honest, she said finally. Depressing, but honest. Sorry. Don't be, I asked. She stood and stretched, her back cracking. Though I'll tell you something. You're wrong about not building anything that lasted. You built a daughter. She exists because you existed. Even if you weren't there to see her grow, that counts. For something, even if it's not what you wanted it to be. I'm not sure it counts when I didn't do any of the actual work of raising her. Maybe not, Helen agreed. But Emma's smart and funny and kind, and half of who she is came from you, genetically speaking. You gave her the raw materials. Katie and Dad shaped her into who she became. That's how it works. We're all collaborations, whether we want to be or not. She pulled on her coat and headed for the door, then paused. I'm not saying you deserve credit for Emma. You don't. But I am saying you're not as insignificant as you think you are. Your existence mattered, even when your actions didn't. After she left, Levi sat in the office, looking at the wedding ring and the photograph. The building creaked around him in the cold wind, and somewhere below, Jerome shuffled in the shelter Levi had built for him behind the building. Helen was wrong, he thought. His existence hadn't mattered, but maybe, just maybe, he could make his continued existence matter going forward. He couldn't change the past 40 years, but he had control over the next 40 days, or months, or however much time he had left. He stood and walked through the building, room by room, noting progress. Walls patched, floors swept, windows cleaned, small victories, but victories nonetheless. In the restaurant, he found the cream-colored paint Martin had brought and pried open one can. Tomorrow, he'd start painting. It would brighten the space, make it feel less like a tomb and more like a place being reborn. He dipped a brush in the paint and made one long stroke on the wall, covering the water-stained plaster with fresh cream. It looked good. It looked like hope. Tomorrow, he'd do more. And the day after that, and the day after that, until the whole building gleamed with new life, or until he ran out of time, money, and strength, whichever came first. But tonight, in this moment, one stroke of paint on one wall felt like enough. Levi was up on a ladder, replacing a section of crown molding in the restaurant when Helen arrived, 3 weeks before Christmas. She looked different, pale, nervous, clutching an envelope in her hand as if it might explode. "We need to talk," she said. Levi climbed down from the ladder, his knee protesting the movement. "What's wrong?" Helen sat at one of the tables they'd restored, the envelope still in her hand. "I did something. I'm not sure if it was the right thing, but I did it anyway, and now we have to deal with the consequences." "You're scaring me," Levi said, sitting across from her. 2 weeks ago, I called Emma, told her about you, about the building, about what you're doing here, about the letters Mum kept, about everything." The world seemed to tilt slightly. Levi gripped the edge of the table. "You told her about me." "I told her," Helen confirmed. "She had a right to know. She's 42 years old, and she spent her whole life thinking her father was just some guy who didn't matter, who wasn't worth discussing. She deserved to know the truth, that her father did exist, that her mother loved him, that the reason he wasn't there wasn't because he didn't care, but because he never knew." How did she react? Helen was quiet for a moment. She was angry. Not at you, well, yes, at you, but mostly at Mom, at me, at Dad for going along with the secret. She felt like we'd lied to her whole life. And we had, technically. We'd kept the truth from her because we thought it was kinder than telling her that her father was alive somewhere but had abandoned her mother. "I did abandon her mother," Levi said quietly. "I know, but Emma didn't need to carry that weight. That was my reasoning, and Mum's reasoning, and Dad's reasoning. We were protecting her. Or we thought we were." Helen finally set the envelope on the table between them. "This came yesterday. It's from Emma. For you." Levi stared at the envelope as if it were a snake. His name was written on it in careful handwriting, Levi Boone. Not father or dad, just his name. "I can't," he said. "You have to," Helen said. "She wrote it. You need to read it." With shaking hands, Levi picked up the envelope and opened it. The letter inside was 2 pages, written on nice stationery, the kind that suggested someone who took correspondence seriously. "Dear Levi," it began, and he already felt the distance in that greeting, the formality that declared he was a stranger, not family. "Helen told me about you. About my mother's letters that you never received, about the grand gambling hall, about what you're doing there now. I've spent the past 2 weeks processing this information, and I still don't know exactly how I feel. Angry, certainly. Confused, definitely. But also, and this is the part that surprises me, curious. I grew up believing I didn't have a father, at least not a biological one. Thomas Wright was my father in every way that mattered. He raised me, loved me, taught me who I wanted to be. I never felt the absence of you because I had him. But now, knowing you existed, knowing my mother loved you once, knowing she tried to tell you about me, it changes the story I've been telling myself about where I came from. Helen says, you're restoring the grand gambling hall, the building that meant so much to my mother. That building was my second home growing up. My mother ran it until I was in high school, and some of my best memories happened within those walls. Knowing it's being restored, that someone cares enough to bring it back to life, that matters to me. I've talked to my husband about this, and he thinks I should meet you. He says I'll never have peace with this if I don't at least see who you are, hear your side of things. My therapist agrees. Everyone agrees except me, and yet here I am, writing this letter, which I suppose means some part of me agrees too. I'll be in Salvation Bend on December 22nd. I'm bringing my family, my husband Michael and my 2 children, Sophie and Jack. We're coming to visit Helen for Christmas anyway, but I'd like to meet you while we're there. No promises about how it will go. No expectations beyond a conversation. But I think we both owe it to my mother to at least try. If you don't want to meet, I'll understand. This is complicated and painful, and maybe some things are better left in the past, but if you do want to meet, Helen will arrange it. Emma Wright Callahan. Levi read the letter 3 times, his eyes blurring with tears. He was too stunned to wipe away. His daughter was coming. His daughter wanted to meet him. His daughter had children, his grandchildren, and she was bringing them to Salvation Bend in less than 3 weeks. "I don't know what to do," he said, his voice breaking. "You meet her," Helen said. "That's what you do. You meet her and you tell her the truth, that you were young and stupid and selfish, and that you've regretted it every day. Since you learned about her, you tell her about Katie, about the love you had and the mistakes you made. You let her decide what kind of relationship she wants with you, if any. What if she hates me? Then she hates you," Helen said bluntly. "That's her right, but at least she'll know who you are. At least you'll have tried." Levi stood and walked to the window, looking out at Main Street. December 22nd, 3 weeks. He'd been working on the building for nearly 2 months, and while progress was visible, it was nowhere near finished. Bare plaster still showed in patches. The 2nd floor was a construction zone. The 3rd floor was barely touched. He'd wanted to have it perfect before Emma saw it, wanted to show her that he was capable of honoring her mother's legacy. But perfect wasn't possible in 3 weeks. Barely adequate might not even be possible. "I need to work faster," he said. "I need to show her that I'm serious, that this isn't just—" "Levi," Helen interrupted. "She doesn't care about the building. I mean, she cares, but that's not why she's coming. She's coming to meet you. The building is just context. The building is all I have to offer her," Levi said. "I don't have stories about her childhood because I wasn't there. I don't have advice or wisdom because I've spent my whole life making the wrong choices. But I can show her this, that I'm trying to do right by her mother's memory. That I'm trying to build something that lasts." Helen came to stand beside him. "You know what I think? I think you're terrified. I think you've spent 2 months working on this building as a way of avoiding the real work, figuring out who you are and whether you're someone worth knowing. Emma's coming forces you to face that. And maybe you're not ready." "I'm not ready," Levi agreed, "but I don't think I'll ever be ready. Some things you just have to do anyway." They stood there in silence, looking out at the grey December day. Jerome was visible in the pasture, standing stoically in the cold, waiting for Levi to bring him his evening hay. "December 22nd, Levi said. "That's 3 weeks. 21 days, Helen confirmed. "Then I have 21 days to finish what I can, prepare what I can, and somehow become the kind of man who deserves to meet his daughter." He turned to Helen. "Will you help me?" "I've been helping you," she said. "Why stop now?" That night, after Helen left, Levi sat in the office with Emma's letter, reading it over and over. His daughter's handwriting, his daughter's words, his daughter's life, lived entirely without him, but somehow intersecting with his now 42 years too late. He thought about Katie, writing all those letters he'd never received. She'd been trying to give him a chance, trying to keep the door open even when logic said she should have slammed it shut. And now Emma was offering him the same grace, a chance, undeserved but given anyway. He couldn't waste it, wouldn't waste it. Levi pulled out a piece of paper and began making a list. Everything that absolutely had to be finished before December 22nd. Everything that would show Emma he was serious, committed, capable of following through on something that mattered. The list grew long, impossibly long. But impossible was just another word for difficult, and Levi had spent his whole life doing difficult things. This time, though, the difficult thing was the right thing, and that made all the difference. He worked until midnight, then stumbled back to his rented room and fell into bed, exhausted but determined. 21 days. He could do this. He had to do this. His daughter was coming home to a building her mother had loved, and Levi was going to make damn sure it was worthy of them both. The next 3 weeks became a blur of motion and purpose. Word spread through Salvation Bend that Emma was coming, and something shifted in the town's attitude toward the restoration project. What had been a quixotic effort by a broke old cowboy became something else. A community rallying around one of their own, preparing to welcome Katie's daughter home. People showed up without being asked. Dutch Holloway brought his nephew, a professional roofer, who spent a weekend patching the worst of the holes and replacing missing shingles. The job wasn't perfect, but it would hold through winter. Martin Cross organized a crew to tackle the exterior painting. They couldn't do all 3 stories, but they managed to get the first floor and the entrance looking fresh and clean, the white paint gleaming like it had in the old photographs. Mrs. Chen arrived one morning with a box of linens, tablecloths, napkins, curtains for the restaurant windows. From the old days, she explained. Katie sold them to me when she closed the hall, said maybe I could use them for the boarding house. Never did. Been sitting in my attic ever since. Time they came home. Raymond's son-in-law finished the electrical work, refusing to take payment beyond materials cost. This building's part of town history, he said. Feels right to help bring it back. But the hardest work fell to Levi and Helen, who spent every available hour cleaning, repairing, and restoring. They painted walls, scrubbed floors, fixed broken furniture, and sorted through decades of accumulated memories. They worked mostly in silence, the kind of comfortable quiet that comes when 2 people understand each other without needing constant conversation. One evening, 10 days before Emma was due to arrive, they were working in the restaurant when Helen found something behind the bar, a leather-bound book, water-damaged but intact. She opened it carefully, and her breath caught. "The guest book," she said, "from when this was a hotel. Look." She brought it to Levi, and together they paged through it. Entries dating back to the 1,890 seconds, names and dates, and brief comments from travelers who'd stayed at the Grand Gambling Hall. Cowboys, and miners and families heading west. Businessmen and performers and drifters. Each one had left their mark, a name, a date, sometimes a drawing or a pressed flower or a brief note about their journey. "My grandfather's entry is in here somewhere," Helen said, flipping pages carefully. "He stayed here before he met Katie. Let me find it." She searched until she found a page from 1976. "Here, Thomas Wright, from Albuquerque. Staying 2 nights while interviewing for teaching position. Beautiful building, welcoming staff. Hope to return soon." She traced the writing with her finger. He did return, 3 weeks later, to take the teaching job. That's when he met Katie. She served him lunch in this very room. He said she was the most alive person he'd ever met, that she lit up the whole building just by being in it. Levi imagined Katie young and vibrant, serving food to travelers, managing the hotel and casino, creating a place where people felt welcomed. He'd missed all of that, had been out there somewhere winning belt buckles while she built this life without him. "We should put this back out," Helen said. "Start it up again. When the building opens, whatever it becomes, people should sign the guest book, continue the tradition. If it opens," Levi said. "When," Helen corrected firmly. "You're going to finish this, Levi. We're going to finish this." He wanted to believe her. Some days he did believe her. Other days he woke up exhausted and aching, looked at how much work remained, and wondered if this whole thing wasn't just an old man's delusion. On December 18th, 4 days before Emma's arrival, they reached a milestone. The restaurant was finished. Not perfect, but clean and painted and furnished with tables and chairs they'd restored. The windows sparkled with the curtains Mrs. Chen had provided. The floors gleamed from multiple rounds of scrubbing and polish. The bar had been refinished and bottles empty. Decorative ones from Dutch's collection lined the shelves behind it. They stood in the center of the room, surveying their work. Jerome stood in the doorway, having wandered in to investigate, his presence somehow making the moment feel official. "It looks good," Helen said. "Really good. It looks like a restaurant nobody's going to eat in," Levi said. "Because I don't know how to run a restaurant, and I don't have money to stock a kitchen, and I—" "Stop," Helen interrupted. Stop catastrophizing. This isn't about running a business. This is about showing Emma that you honored her mother's legacy, that you took something broken and made it whole again, that you're capable of commitment and follow-through. That's what matters. Levi walked to the window and looked out at Main Street. Christmas decorations had gone up, strings of lights, wreaths on doors, a tree in front of the post office. Salvation Bend looked almost cheerful, almost alive, despite being a dying town. Maybe that was the point. Maybe. Being alive wasn't about thriving, just about refusing to quit. I'm terrified, he admitted, of meeting Emma, of her seeing me and being disappointed, of her asking me questions I don't have good answers for. You should be terrified, Helen said, coming to stand beside him. This is the biggest moment of your life. You're meeting your daughter for the first time, and you're 63 years old, and there's no roadmap for how this is supposed to go. But you know what? She's probably terrified too. She's meeting the man who should have been her father, the man her mother loved, the man who wasn't there. Neither of you knows how to do this. So you'll figure it out together. What if she hates me? Then she hates you, and you accept it, and you keep restoring this building because it's the right thing to do regardless of what Emma thinks. Helen paused, then added more softly, but I don't think she'll hate you. I think she'll see what I see, a man who made terrible mistakes when he was young and who spent the last 2 months trying to make something right. That's not nothing. Levi turned to face her. Why are you doing this? Helping me, I mean. You don't owe me anything. You owe me less than nothing. Helen was quiet for a long moment. I'm doing it for Katie, she said finally. She deserved better than what life gave her. She deserved the love she believed in when she was 20. She deserved answers to those letters she wrote. She deserved so much that she never got. I can't give her any of that, but I can help you do this one thing she would have wanted. I can help make sure her building survives. That's for her. Just for her. Helen smiled slightly. Maybe not just for her. Maybe also because watching you work yourself half to death to honor a woman you knew 4 decades ago gives me hope that people can change, that it's never too late to become who you should have been all along. I spent 20 years teaching 7th graders, trying to convince them that their choices matter, that who they become isn't predetermined. You're proof that I wasn't lying to them. Before Levi could respond, they heard vehicles pulling up outside. Through the window, they saw trucks parking, people getting out what looked like half the town. Dutch and Martin and Raymond and Mrs. Chen and a dozen others, all carrying supplies. Raymond came to the door. Heard you might need some help with final touches. Thought we'd have a work party. Also brought pizza from Santa Fe, and Dutch brought beer, so it's partly a party. The next 4 hours were chaos, the good kind. People painted the 2nd floor hallway. Someone fixed the railing on the front steps. A group of women cleaned the windows on the 3rd floor. The men hauled away the last of the major debris. Someone brought a radio, and Christmas music played while they worked. Around 9 o'clock, they gathered in the restaurant for pizza and beer. The space looked almost magical, the lights they'd strung up casting warm glows, the room full of people and conversation and laughter. This was what the grand gambling hall had been built, for community gathering, the simple act of people coming together. Dutch stood and raised his beer. To Levi Boone, who won a building and decided to win a town. People cheered, and Levi felt his throat tighten with emotion. These people had accepted him, helped him, given him their time and resources and belief. He didn't deserve it, but maybe that was the point. Grace wasn't about deserving. After everyone left, Levi and Helen walked through the building one more time. The restaurant gleamed. The 2nd floor looked presentable. The 3rd floor, well, it was still rough, but at least it was clean. 4 more days, Helen said. Then Emma arrives. 4 more days, Levi echoed. They reached the office, where Katie's letters still sat in their box, alongside Emma's letter to Levi. The guest book lay on the desk, ready to record new stories. Whatever happens, Helen said, you did something real here. You took a broken building and you made it matter again. That counts, Levi. Even if nothing else works out, that counts. After she left, Levi sat at the desk and opened the guest book to the first blank page. He picked up a pen and wrote, "The 18th of December 2025, Levi Boone returned to Salvation Bend after 42 years, found a building that needed saving, and maybe found a way to save myself. Tomorrow my daughter comes home to a place her mother loved. I pray I'm worthy of the moment." He set down the pen and closed the book. Tomorrow he'd do final preparations, flowers, final cleaning, making sure everything was as perfect as he could make it. And then December 22nd would arrive, and he'd meet Emma, and his entire life would be measured by how he handled the next conversation. Outside, Jerome brayed goodnight. Somewhere in town, Christmas lights twinkled against the dark, and in the grand gambling hall, empty but no longer forgotten, the past and future waited to meet each other at last. December 22nd arrived clear and cold. Levi woke before dawn, too nervous to sleep. He dressed in his best clothes, which wasn't saying much, just cleaner jeans and a button-up shirt he'd bought at the thrift store in Santa Fe. He shaved carefully, cut himself twice from shaking hands, and stared at his reflection in the cracked mirror above his dresser. 63 years old. Grey hair, weathered face, hands scarred from a lifetime of work. This was who Emma would see, not the young cowboy her mother had loved, but an old man trying to make amends 4 decades too late. He walked to the grand gambling hall as the sun rose, painting Main Street gold. Helen was already there, arranging flowers on the tables in the restaurant. She'd brought fresh pine boughs and holly, making the space smell like Christmas. "You look terrified," she said when she saw him. "I am terrified." "Good. Means you care." She adjusted a vase, stepped back to examine it, then moved it 2 inches to the left. "Emma called this morning. They're leaving Albuquerque at 10. Should be here by noon." 2 hours. Levi's stomach clenched. "I made coffee," Helen said, pointing to a thermos she'd brought. "And I stopped at the bakery in Santa Fe, got pastries. Figured we should have something to offer them." Levi poured coffee with shaking hands and drank it standing by the window, watching Main Street slowly wake up. Mrs. Chen opening her boarding house. Martin sweeping the steps of the feed store. Raymond walking his dog. Normal morning in a small town, except nothing about this morning was normal. At 11:30, Helen found something in the office, a wooden box she'd missed before, tucked behind some old ledgers. Inside was a collection of recipe cards, handwritten, some stained with use. Katie's recipes, instructions for pie crusts and stews, and the special Christmas cookies she'd made every year. "These were Mom's," Helen said, her voice thick. "Her grandmother taught her to cook, and she taught me, and I taught Emma. These recipes, their family history, written in food." She set the box on the bar, next to the guest book and the box of letters. Artifacts of Katie's life, tangible proof that she'd existed, mattered, created things that lasted beyond her time on Earth. At 11:55, a car pulled up outside. A newer SUV, silver, with New Mexico plates. Levi's heart stopped. The driver's door opened, and a man got out, mid-40s, kind face, carrying himself with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. Emma's husband, probably. Then the passenger door opened, and a woman emerged. Levi's breath caught. She looked like Katie. Same red hair, though darker. Same delicate build. Same way of moving, careful but purposeful. But her face was her own, and there, in the shape of her jaw, the set of her shoulders, he saw himself, his daughter, his blood, living, breathing proof that he'd existed for some reason beyond his own selfish wants. 2 children got out of the back seat, a girl about 12, a boy maybe 9. They looked around Main Street with the barely concealed boredom of kids dragged somewhere they didn't particularly want to be. Helen went to the door and opened it. Emma, Helen, they hugged, long and tight, the embrace of sisters who'd weathered loss together. Then Emma turned and looked at Levi, and time seemed to stop. She studied him with the same careful assessment he'd been giving her, taking in his age, his nervousness, his uncertainty. Her expression was unreadable. "Levi Boone," she said. Not a question, a statement, naming him, making him real. "Emma," his voice cracked on her name. "Thank you for coming." She nodded slowly, then gestured to her family. "This is my husband, Michael, and our children, Sophie and Jack." Michael stepped forward and offered his hand. His grip was firm, his eyes measuring Levi with protective assessment. "Mr. Boone." "Just Levi," he managed. The children hung back, uncertain, until Emma said, "Go ahead and explore. This is where I spent my summers when I was your age. You can look around." They disappeared quickly, grateful for an excuse to escape the awkward adult moment. Helen offered to give them a tour, and Michael went with them, leaving Levi and Emma alone in the restaurant. Emma walked slowly around the space, touching tables, examining the restored bar, looking at the curtains in the windows. "It looks good," she said finally. "Better than I remember, actually. Mom would have—" She stopped, her voice catching. "Mom would have been pleased." "I hope so," Levi said. "I tried to honor what she built, what her family built." Emma turned to face him fully. "Helen told me about the letters, about Mom trying to reach you, about you never knowing." "I didn't know," Levi said. "But that doesn't excuse I should have stayed, should have been there for her, for you. I was 21 and stupid and selfish, and I ran because staying meant growing up, and I wasn't ready for that." "No," Emma agreed quietly. "You weren't." The words hung between them, true and painful and impossible to take back. Emma walked to the bar and picked up Katie's box of letters. She opened it, seeing the bundle tied with red ribbon, and something in her face softened. "Helen, let me read these. All of them. Mom never stopped hoping you'd come back, even after she married Dad. Even after years passed. She kept that small hope alive, just in case." "I'm sorry," Levi said, and the words felt impossibly inadequate. "Those are the emptiest words in the English language, but I don't know what else to say. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I didn't know. I'm sorry I was the kind of man who left in the first place." "What kind of man are you now?" Emma asked, and the question felt like a test. Levi thought about it, really thought about it. "I don't know yet. I'm trying to be the kind of man who finishes what he starts, who honors commitments, who builds things that last. But I'm 63, and I've only been trying for 2 months. I don't know if that's enough time to become someone different from who I've always been." Emma set down the letters and walked to where the recipe box sat. She opened it, and her eyes filled with tears. "Mom's recipes. I have some of these memorized. She taught me to cook using these cards, same way her grandmother taught her. That's legacy, not just genetics, but knowledge passed down, traditions maintained." "You're a teacher," Levi said. "Like your father." "Thomas." "Like the father who raised me," Emma corrected gently but firmly. "Yes, I teach high school English. I try to convince teenagers that reading matters, that stories matter, that understanding how people communicate is essential to being human. Some days they believe me. Your mother would be proud." "She was proud," Emma said. "She told me so many times. She was a good mother. She gave me everything I needed." She paused, then added, "Except the truth about you." "Maybe she was trying to protect you," Levi offered. "Maybe. Or maybe she was trying to protect the memory of who you were when she loved you. Maybe telling me the truth would have meant admitting you chose not to come back, and that was too painful." Emma looked at him directly. "Helen says you didn't get the letters, that you never knew. Is that true?" "It's true," Levi said. "I spent my 20s and 30s moving from town to town, rodeo to rodeo. Mail couldn't find me because I never stayed anywhere long enough. By the time I came back to New Mexico, 15 years had passed, and I figured—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I figured Katie had moved on, had a life, and me showing up would only hurt her, so I stayed away. I thought I was being noble, but really, I was just being a coward." Emma nodded, slowly processing this. "I don't know if I can call you Dad. That name belongs to Thomas Wright. He earned it. I wouldn't expect you to," Levi said. "I haven't earned anything. But," Emma continued. I think I'd like to know you, as Levi, as the man my mother loved once, as the person who's restoring this building she cared about. Not as a father, I already had one of those, and he was wonderful, but maybe as, she searched for the word, as family, distant family, family you're getting to know. Something in Levi's chest unclenched slightly. Not forgiveness, exactly, but possibility. A door opened just a crack, letting in a sliver of light. I'd like that, he said quietly. Emma reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped package. I brought you something. Helen told me you'd been working on the building non-stop, trying to have it ready for today. I wanted you to have this. Levi unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a Christmas ornament, a small ceramic building, hand-painted, clearly meant to represent the grand gambling hall. It was lovingly detailed, right down to the balcony and the windows. Mom made that, Emma said. Years ago, in a ceramics class she took, she gave it to me, said it was to remember where I came from. I'd like you to have it. To remember what you're restoring, not just a building, but a place that mattered to real people. Levi held the ornament carefully, as if it might shatter. I'll treasure this. I know you will, Emma said. Then, after a moment, Sophie and Jack don't know who you are yet. I've just told them you're a friend of Aunt Helen's. If this goes well, if we can figure out what this relationship is, maybe eventually I'll tell them the truth. But for now, let's just be people who are getting to know each other. That sounds right, Levi agreed. Footsteps on the stairs announced the return of Helen, Michael, and the children. Sophie was exclaiming about the old piano, and Jack was asking if the building was haunted. Normal kid questions, normal family noise. Emma looked at Levi one more time. Thank you for trying, for this. She gestured around the restaurant. For honoring Mom's memory, that means something. It's not nearly enough, Levi said. No, Emma agreed, but it's a start. Emma and her family stayed for 2 hours. They had coffee and pastries that Helen had brought. Sophie played the old piano, coaxing surprisingly decent music from keys that hadn't been touched in years. Jack explored every corner of the building with the fearless curiosity of a 9-year-old, asking questions about everything. Michael talked with Levi about the restoration work, genuinely interested in the process, the challenges, the small victories. And Emma walked through the building room by room, touching walls her mother had painted, standing in spaces where her childhood had unfolded. In the office, she found the photograph of herself and Katie that Levi had framed, and she stood looking at it for a long time without speaking. When they finally left, with promises to stay in touch and plans to return in the spring, Levi stood on the front steps, watching the SUV drive away. Helen stood beside him, and neither of them spoke until the vehicle disappeared from view. You did good, Helen said finally. I survived it, Levi corrected. There's a difference. No, Helen said firmly. You did good. You were honest. You didn't make excuses or beg for forgiveness you haven't earned. You let her set the terms, and you accepted them with grace. That's doing good. They went back inside, and the building felt different now, less like a project and more like a place with purpose. Emma's presence had blessed it somehow, brought it full circle from Katie's time to now. Over the next 3 months, the work continued. The harsh part of winter came and went, and spring arrived with its promise of renewal. More volunteers joined the effort. The second floor was finished and furnished not as a gambling hall anymore, but as a community space. Tables for meetings, comfortable chairs for reading, shelves that Raymond donated and that Levi filled with books from estate sales and donations. The town council, impressed by what Levi had accomplished, granted him a small business loan to finish the 3rd floor. He converted it into affordable rooms for rent, nothing fancy, but clean and safe and reasonably priced. Mrs. Chen helped him learn the hospitality business, and by April he had his first tenant, a teacher who'd taken a job at the elementary school and needed a place to stay. Helen became his business partner, officially. She handled the bookkeeping and organization, while Levi managed the building maintenance and operations. They worked together easily, the way people do when they've been through something difficult and come out the other side, changed but intact. The restaurant space became something unexpected, a community center that served breakfast on weekends. Not a full restaurant, just coffee and simple food, but it gave people a reason to gather. The old card tables came back out, and some of the retired men started a weekly poker game, nothing high stakes, just something to do. The women organized a quilting circle that met on Tuesday afternoons. Kids did homework at the tables after school, while waiting for parents to finish work. The grand gambling hall had become what it was always meant to be, the heart of Salvation Bend. On a warm day in May, 6 months after Emma's visit, Levi stood in the pasture behind the building with Dutch Holloway and his nephew. They were installing the restored sign, the original grand gambling hall sign that had been lying in pieces on the front steps. Dutch's nephew had carefully reconstructed it, replacing rotted boards with new ones, repainting the letters in the original style. "It's going to look good," Dutch said, as they hoisted the sign into position above. The entrance. Like the old photos, they secured it carefully, and when they stepped back, the building looked complete. Not new, it still had character, still showed its age, but restored. Dignified. Purposeful. Jerome stood nearby, watching the process with his usual patient expression. The mule had become something of a town mascot, and children loved visiting to bring him carrots and apples. Levi had built him a proper shelter and kept him well fed, and in return Jerome provided the kind of steady, uncomplicated companionship that Levi had needed without knowing it. That evening, after Dutch and his nephew left, Levi and Helen sat on the front steps, drinking iced tea and watching the sunset paint Main Street gold. "Emma called today," Helen said. "She and the family are coming for a visit next month. She wants Sophie to take piano lessons, and she asked if we knew anyone in town who taught." "Mrs. Chen used to teach piano," Levi said. "Years ago. I'll mention it to her," Helen said. She was quiet for a moment, then added, "Emma asked about you specifically, wanted to know how you were doing, how the building was coming along. She's interested, Levi. She's building a bridge, even if it's slow." Levi nodded, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the spring weather. He wasn't. Emma's father would never be her father in any real sense, but maybe he could be something, a person in her life, a connection to her mother's history, family, in the way Emma had named it that first difficult meeting. "I'm 64 years old," Levi said. "For most of my life, I thought the best I could hope for was to just exist. Take up as little space as possible and eventually disappear without anyone noticing. But now I wake up every morning in a room above a building that matters, with work to do that helps people, and a daughter who's willing to know me. That's more than I deserve." "Maybe," Helen agreed, "but maybe the point isn't about deserving. Maybe it's about what you do with what you're given, even when it comes 40 years too late." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower and the first stars appeared. Somewhere inside the building, the restored clock, another project Dutch had tackled, chimed the hour. The sound carried down Main Street, marking time in a town that refused to be forgotten. Levi thought about Katie, and the letters she'd written, and the building she'd loved. He thought about Emma, and the ornament that now hung in the office window, catching light. He thought about Jerome and Helen and the people of Salvation Bend who'd helped an old cowboy learn that it was never too late to build something that lasted. Sometimes the things we've lost find a way back to us when we least expect it. And sometimes, when we're very fortunate, we find that we've been given a second chance, not to fix what broke, but to create something new from the pieces that remain. Levi had won a building in a poker game, but in restoring it, he'd found something much more valuable, a reason to matter, a place to belong, and proof that even old cowboys could learn to stay when staying was the hardest and best thing to do. The grand gambling hall stood proud on Main Street, its windows glowing warm against the gathering dark, its doors open to whoever needed a place to gather, to rest, to belong. And inside, an old man who'd spent his life running had finally found a home worth keeping.